very pleased to announce that we have Carolyn Boyd, who is going to be talking to us about introduction to the visual culture of Lower Pecos Canyon. And Dr. Carolyn Boyd was an artist who became an archaeologist, and she works down in the, Joel, can you cut out all the other voices, please? Thank you. So she's an artist who turned archaeologist who founded Shumla, an organization to preserve, study, and share the rock art of the Lower Pecos area. And she has many articles and a couple of really great books to her name, one of which was just published 2 years ago, I guess, the White Shaman mural. And she also has recently received a Lifetime Achievement Award in Archaeology from the Texas Historical Commission. And as you may have gathered, some of us from the Rock Art Association will be going down to the Pecos area in March. If anyone on this call is not a member of the Colorado Rock Art Association and would like to join, you can visit our website, which is just Colorado Rock Art Association. You'll find it, and there should be a membership application there. While we are on this presentation, during the presentation itself, everyone will be muted except for Dr. Carolyn Boyd. And then at the end, and that's because, as you can tell, probably even from this introductory part, it's so easy to have background noise, and it's really hard to hear if you have background noise. So we mute everyone, and then at the end, she will take questions. We will unmute people. Hopefully, everyone can be quiet with their background noise, and you can ask her questions. So with that, Carolyn, it's your turn now. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Anne and Joel, for putting this together. This is my first webinar, so you all are my guinea pigs, but I'm really looking forward to sharing with you something that's clearly near and dear to my heart. As she said, I'm with Shumla at this point, and as an advisor more than an active person in Comstock. I'm now at Texas State University, where I'm an endowed research professor, and the reason for this is we want to start training up more young people, and I bring this up so that if any of you know anybody interested in going into archaeology that are especially interested in rock art, I am here and taking graduate students. So that's an exciting new step for all of us. But tonight in the webinar, I'll be providing just a very brief introduction to the visual culture of the Lower Pecos, including an overview of the different rock art styles that are present, at least those that are known or identified. The majority of the presentation, however, I'll be focusing more on Pecos River style rock art. And as many of you may know, this is recognized as one of the most complex rock art traditions in the world. I'll be including some information on how the artists produce these Pecos River style murals, and then I'm going to go into a little bit of how we go about interpreting the imagery. What are the tools and the methods that we use to do that? And finally, I'll end it with discussions on some new insights that we at Shumla are gaining into the worldview of the people of the Lower Pecos. What I will not be going into is how we go about documenting the rock art. When you go, for those of you who are going on the tour, you will be getting an up close and personal opportunity to witness that with the Shumla staff in Comstock. So I've left that completely on their table, or at least mostly. I mentioned some of it in here. So where are we? Shumla's headquarters is located just north of the U.S.-Mexico border in the region that we refer to as the Lower Pecos Canyonlands. And although the boundaries of this area are really ill-defined, the visual and the material culture associated with it, it extends down about 100 miles south of the border and about 70 miles north. So when we say ill-defined, the reason is that we really don't know the most southern extent of Pecos River style rock art yet. So it goes down into that area. The north side encompasses the Devil's River, which is here, beautiful river, the Pecos River, and the Rio Grande. And of course, hundreds of canyon tributaries off of those main rivers. Although the area today looks a bit like a desert, oftentimes people refer to it as a desert, prior to overgrazing and the suppression of fire, the region was really a lush grassland. It's more of a savanna. Along the uplands, you're going to find shrubs such as those that you see here, almost all of which contain thorns. So folks going on the tour, long pants are absolutely in order because just about everything in the Lower Pecos will prickle you, stick you, bite you, or something like that. So be prepared. Some of the trails that you hike and will be hiking for those going on the tour will be looking like this, that are nice and easy along the uplands. And then they're going to get a little bit less developed as you start going down into the canyons, and you're going to start noticing vegetation changes as you hike in. In the picture, you can see a picture of, this is Vicki and Jared. These are two Shumla staff, and this is Karen Steelman. These are some of the folks that you'll meet. And some of the trails can become quite challenging, as you can see here. And here, this is the descent into Halo Shelter. Now, I don't want to get everybody freaked out that's going on the trip, because you need to understand a lot of folks that you would never expect to be able to make this trip do. It's just that you have to be slow and steady and very careful, and a lot of help with each other along the way. And there are going to be some other challenges that you might encounter, and hopefully you won't. This is a common, well, I shouldn't say a common occurrence, but if you're going to find anybody, this is probably who you're going to find, a little rock rattler. But no matter what the challenges, the destinations are worth it, both in terms of the spectacular views. This is Crab Shelter overlooking the Devil's River, and absolutely stunning rock art. This is Halo Shelter, or a portion of Halo Shelter. Some of the rock shelters that contain the rock art are small, such as this one. This is the White Shaman site, with little to no cultural materials in situ at this time. And others are huge and contain deeply stratified archaeological deposits that span thousands of years. This is Eagle Cave. You can see the little people down here. That gives you a sense of scale. The Eagle Cave deposits have yielded components that date to about 13,000 years ago, including butchered bison bone and some bone fragments of a juvenile mammoth that was found in association with a stone tool assemblage. So that is super, super cool. If you want to learn more about any of this that's going on at Eagle Cave, let me know when we go off, and I can give you some of the websites and blogs and so forth that you can tap into for more information. But in addition to this really, really rich record of lifeways that's preserved in the archaeological deposits, we have a very long record of expressive culture or visual culture that's displayed on the canyon walls and in these rock shelters. The four main categories of rock art that you generally see are the Pecos River style, the red monochrome, red linear, and historic period. The most recent rock paintings or pictographs date to the historic period, and they contain figures that are easily recognizable to most audiences today. Things like cattle and horses and missions and robed figures, things emblematic of European contact. Myers Springs, which is on the tour list, is one of the premier places to see historic period rock art. The hike is very easy, and the art is really, really wonderful. Sadly, some of it has been impacted by vandalism in the past, such as what you can see here when ranchers and probably the military that were going through this area years and years ago took pot shots at the rock art. but it's still absolutely worth seeing. It's just beautiful. Another one of the styles, the red monochrome style, is associated with the late prehistoric. This period is marked by the appearance of the bow and arrow somewhere around 1000 AD. This rock art style portrays people that are holding bows and arrows. You can see some here. There's a bow and arrow here and here and here, as well as realistically depicted humans and animals. It's a beautiful, beautiful site. I cannot stress how gorgeous this place is. It's located along a spring that houses some of the best preserved red monochrome paintings. And as you hike down to the spring, you're going to pass a stone house that you see right here. And this stone house was erected somewhere around 1800 or perhaps earlier. We really don't know for sure when it was built, but there is inside somebody carved their name and initials into it, and it was like 1863 or something like that, a long time ago. It's really an interesting site, so you'll want to check that out when you go down. But the remnants of the paintings at Painted Canyon span really greater than 300 feet. Most of them are not there anymore. They've been scoured out by flooding, but you can still find remnants of it for about 300 feet. The best preserved are located near the middle of the shelter. These red monochrome figures are characterized by humans with their arms held up in a stick-em-up position. They're pretty much life-size or close to life-size. They're usually accompanied by a wide variety of animals, such as you see here, deer. We have deer and here, and we have turkey and rabbit and catfish, variety of different types of animals. For those of you who are going to go to this site, you're going to want to look for the recurved bow in the rock art. While the simple bow was brought into the area somewhere around 1000 AD, as I understand it, the recurved bow doesn't appear in the American Southwest before about 1300 AD. So it's pretty exciting to have it here in this site in the red monochrome paintings. Another motif that's really interesting at this site, and likely a later addition to the mural, is a circle with an interior cross. I'm wondering how many of you are out there right now nodding their heads saying, I've seen things like that before. You probably have in petroglyphs and pictographs and other places. This is a widespread symbol, and not only in the Lower Pecos, but around the world, and it's most often associated with the sun and or Venus. On the upstream end of the shelter, near the fence, you're going to look for some very small stick figures. These are some of my favorites, and I know they are of Bob Mark, who's listening in on this. These particular little figures, they're red linear figures, and they look like they're dancing or holding onto each other's heads. These are classic examples of red linear paintings. And again, they're going to be right over in this area. And if you're not knowing where to look, you're going to have a hard time finding them. The red linear style is one of the earliest rock art styles in the regions. And these tiny little figures, which are usually only a couple of inches tall, are often portrayed in some kind of a group activity, such as dancing or hunting. I have the question marks there in terms of the date, because as I'll talk about here in a little bit, we used to think they were the oldest, but now we're finding them underneath Pecos River style. So we're not exactly sure how old these paintings actually are. We've identified three main body types for red linear: the stick-bodied, the wide-bodied, and the curvilinear, and three different head shapes: the pointed, the round, and the bisected. The bisected is my favorite. I think it's just quite intriguing. The males are often portrayed with something that we refer to as a phallus emblem. This is the only style that we've identified that has this very unusual attribute. If any of you in all of your rock art exploring in different places find this somewhere else, we would really like to know about it. The zoomorphs are fabulous. They're usually portrayed with exaggerated characteristics, such as these very long legs on the antlered deer, or on this figure to the left, an extremely long neck with this little tiny body. No, we didn't have giraffes in the Lower Pecos, so we're not 100% sure what that figure is, but they're preternaturals. They're not normal critters. And as I said, for years we thought red linear was younger than the Pecos River style, but now we know differently. We've identified over 38 examples of red linear figures underneath Pecos River style, and no Pecos River style over the red linear. I don't know if you can see him here. I'll pop him out so you can see him a little bit better. We have a little wide-bodied anthropomorph. He's got his legs in a wide stance, and he's got his phallus and his arms out in profile. Here you can see him, and he is underneath this Pecos River style figure. This one is actually under multiple layers of Pecos River style. He's a classic stick-bodied figure. Bisected head, legs in a wide stance, phallus, all the characteristics of red linear, but definitely underneath the Pecos River style. When you go to curly-tailed panther, you're going to have a chance to see not only these absolutely stunning views and an absolutely gorgeous Pecos River style panel, including this feline, but you can also, if you look very carefully, find some red linear and figures and even a phallus emblem or two off in this section right here. And they're just going to be little tiny figures that are scattered throughout this area. But it's the Pecos River style that's the most complex and, as I said before, compositionally intricate of all the different rock art styles. The artists of these paintings used a variety of earth colors, red, black, yellow, and shades in between to create murals that are extraordinary in the level of skill required to produce them, as well as sheer size and complexity. And I say this from the standpoint of an artist. I worked as an artist professionally before getting my PhD in archaeology. So I'm just continually awed by the level of sophistication in the production of these murals. We have 33 radiocarbon dates for 19 different Pecos River style figures. These are located on both sides of the border, and the dates obtained for them range between 2700 BC and 600 AD. That's a long time for one particular style to be produced. That's thousands of years of one style in production. The Pecos River style is characterized by anthropomorphic figures that are portrayed with headdresses and spear throwers and staffs and all kinds of other paraphernalia. The zoomorphs include predominantly deer and felines, but also you'll find birds and serpents and insect-like figures as well. And then there are those things that don't fit any category very neatly. We refer to those as enigmatic figures. Through experimental archaeology and some chemical studies, we are learning how they went about making the paint to create these polychromatic murals. We know that they used mineral pigments that have been finely ground to produce the color. They used hematite for reds and limonite for yellow and manganese for black. So different earth minerals to actually create the color. These were bound together most likely using bone marrow from a deer, although you could use marrow from any animal. But the benefit of the bone marrow is it's colorless, so when you're making white paint or yellow paint, you don't have discoloration because it's clear. So bone marrow is a binder, works extremely well. Early DNA studies came back showing that they thought it was, when they extracted some ancient DNA, they thought that it was bone marrow from an ungulate. They were not able to replicate that study. So at this point, we don't know for sure, but certainly experimental archaeology demonstrates that it works very well. Well, when you mix those two together, you end up with a gooey mess. So you have to have an emulsifier to thin it out. And one of the best sources of that in the Lower Pecos is yucca, which is also known as soap root. And it produces a wonderful suds. And when you mix this with your fat and mineral combination, you end up with an absolutely glorious satin paint that works as well as any oil paint that I've ever worked with. It will go rancid though if you keep it in a Tupperware container. So I caution you about that. I made that mistake once. It was a pretty disgusting mess. One of the things that we also found that was very useful was if you treat your canvas first with the mucilage from prickly pear, it fills in kind of the little irregularities in the stone, and it makes it smooth when you go across it with a paintbrush. And we use brushes, you know, you can use feathers. They would have used feathers and fibers and animal hair and everything else that you can imagine to produce these. So we've been doing this a lot, making a lot of paint and doing a lot of paintings. And as you can see here, this was one that we did using those ingredients, and they worked extremely well. One of the things that I think is important to point out at this point is that animal fat was something very highly sought after, not something they had in their diet very regularly. It's not like they had a deer every time they went out hunting. So fat was a rare commodity. It was sacred, and yet they were taking food off their plates to produce these paintings with that fat. It just speaks to the potency of these paintings. Another thing that I think it's really important to point out is in a lot of Native American cultures, when these images are produced, they are not just making a picture of something, they are the incarnation of something. They are alive. And when you think about the fact that they brought together all of these sacred elements, minerals, animal fat, yucca, all of which are sacred, to produce these images, you have a better understanding of how they would have viewed these images as living and participating in their daily lives. So many of these murals are quite large, and they extend well out of reach from the ground. In the picture to the right, I'm at the top of a 20-foot ladder. My knees are shaking. You can't see that in the image, but they are shaking. And I'm only about halfway up the mural. So that gives you a sense of how off the ground these can actually be. Clearly, the artist created scaffolding, or used some kind of scaffolding or something to reach the heights that they reached. The picture on the left is at Cedar Springs, and the paintings continue higher than what you see here in comparison to the fella standing there. So not only are they tall, oftentimes they're very wide. Some of these murals span more than 100 feet in length and contain hundreds, really thousands of figures. Others are small, such as the one you see below, this White Shaman site, but they are densely packed with imagery. At Shumla, we're working, sometimes I feel like, virtually around the clock to preserve and study these ancient manuscripts. We're making new discoveries at just an exponential rate. One of the most exciting discoveries has been learning how the artists actually produced the murals, or more specifically, the order in which they applied the paint to produce these murals. And to determine this, we collect photomicrographs using a handheld digital microscope. And the microscope is connected to a laptop via a USB cable. We then place the microscope over the locations where 2 or more colors overlap and take a series of photographs at either 200 or 220 power. This particular one is taken at 50 power, and you can see the yellow overlays the red. You can see through this little opening how the red pops through, but the yellow is overlapping the red. One of the first figures we studied using this technique was this small antlered anthropomorph at the White Shaman site. In the field, when we were both on site and actually when we were illustrating it, we thought we observed that the red paint was actually over the black dots, so that the antlers were overlapping the black dots. And that would suggest that the black dots were painted prior to the red antlers, but that just simply didn't make any sense at all. So we did the microscopy, and what we were able to find was that the red paint does indeed overlap the black. Without a doubt, the red antlers overlay the black. So when the artists painted this, contrary to what we would do, they started it like that and finished it like that. So this starts speaking to things like different cognitive processes that are involved in the production of it. Something else is going on here. It's counterintuitive to paint the black dots and then put in the antlers. So that starts telling us that there's additional meaning here that goes beyond just the form or the symbol itself. We repeated this same process on similar antlered figures in the Lower Pecos, such as at Cedar Springs and at Halo Shelter. You can see the antlered figures with the black dots here and here. At Cedar Springs, it was a slam dunk. The black dots are underneath the red antlers. You can see this here in the photomicrograph with the red overlapping. And actually, when you're in the field, it's quite clear. Once you start looking at it, your brain sees what it wants to see sometimes. And for us, when we first started looking, we would never think about the black dots being painted first. So we always just assumed it to be the other way around. But now we look so much more carefully than we ever did before. And the same thing at Halo Shelter. The red overlays the black. So this is an interesting pattern to find this repeated over and over again in the Lower Pecos in different rock art murals. One of the things I would like to do at some point is to start doing more radiocarbon dating to see if this is a rule that governed the production of all of these figures, and if it, was it just for a snapshot in time that they did this, or was it for the duration of the production of Pecos River style? There's so many questions that we've got. So moving on along, this stratigraphic data is used to determine the paint order not just for single figures, but for entire murals. We use this data when we produce the digital color reproductions of murals. We reproduce these color layer by color layer, so therefore you have to know the order in which they were actually applied. What we learned at the White Shaman site through this microscopy blew us away. At this site, they painted all the black paint first, followed by red, then yellow, and then finally white. So as best as we can figure at this point, the panel production would have gone something like this. We'd start with a blank screen, with a blank canvas. And again, they would have used scaffolding. There would have been a lot that would have gone into this. And then they started applying the paint. Nothing about this panel is random or arbitrary, and we're starting to find that to be the case at other sites as well. Even the order in which the paint was applied to the wall, everything carries meaning. But how do we get at the meaning? That's the tough part. How do we get to that meaning? Well, the key is in the figure attributes. Attributes include physical characteristics such as size, color, and shape, paraphernalia such as weaponry, staffs, and darts, body adornments such as feather hip clusters, headdresses, wrist and elbow adornments. It's all the information that can be classified, measured, and counted. These attributes form the artist's graphic vocabulary. Each was intentionally selected and placed by the artist to communicate an idea, and they're central to our reading of rock art. This data is so important. It's not simply decorative. We collect over 150 pieces of attribute data for each figure. These data are entered into Shumla's searchable rock art database for analysis. Analyzing attribute data through different types of database queries reveals the patterns that we can use to begin the process of interpretation. The patterns are the clues to making sense of past human behavior. As soon as this image popped up on the screen, I'd be willing to bet most of you all sitting out there began reading it visually. You recognized immediately the mythological character that's portrayed in these two images, one of which was created 1,300 years prior to the other. But both contain the defining attributes of, fill in the blank, Medusa. You're not Greek, or some of you might be, but most of you probably aren't. You certainly were not around when either of them was produced, but you are at least minimally familiar with the myth, and you're able to identify this character from mythology. Well, the same was true for the people of the Lower Pecos. When they viewed the imagery, they read it visually. They were familiar with the sacred stories and the attributes of the characters engaged in those stories. This was really driven home to me in 2010 with a visit by a Huichol shaman, Matsua. This was his first visit to the Lower Pecos, and as soon as he stood before the white shaman mural, he began identifying characters and places portrayed in the art. These were the same characters and places I'd identified, but I had not yet published. How could he know this? I experienced this again when I met with Alfredo Lopez Austin, who's the foremost authority on Mesoamerican mythology. He's with the National University in Mexico City. As I showed him motifs from the White Shaman, he began reading them. He'd never seen the White Shaman mural or any of the Pecos River style imagery before, yet he was able to read some of the graphic vocabulary. He, just like that Huichol shaman, is familiar with the myths that informed the mural's production. So while it's true that the artists who painted the White Shaman and the rest of the rock art in the Lower Pecos aren't with us anymore, their sacred stories, their histories, their belief systems did not die. They've endured in the shared symbolic world of American Indians, still alive today. Lopez Austin sees this shared symbolic world as an archaic core that dates back thousands of years. And it forms a web of ideas that is a continuum that's still evident in Native American expressive culture. The actors and the details may change, but at the core, the basic storylines, the basic concepts have amazing resilience. And he says that we can never expect to find a total congruence. You're not going to find an exact 1-1 correlation, an unchanged tradition, but you look for the clues, and finding those clues. Those provide you a key to indigenous thought that allows you to formulate hypotheses about what they actually mean. So essentially it's this. You start with patterns. You look for the patterns in the attribute data. Then you look for those patterns that he's referring to in your ethnographic and ethnohistoric literature. From that, you formulate your hypotheses, and then you test your hypotheses. So let's do a little of that. One of the very first patterns that I identified, and I talked about it in my first book, is this recurring motif. It's a crenellated arch or serpentine arch that has an opening in it, and then there's an anthropomorphic form, oftentimes with an animal attribute that's associated with it. We have it at Rattlesnake Canyon and Cedar Springs. Again, this is the one we were looking at earlier with the dots on the antler tines, passing through an arch with an opening. Oh, and this is one of my all-time favorite from Mystic Shelter. Beautiful, beautiful one. It has all these little anthropomorphs down here in this lower area as well. And then there's the one at the Lower Pecos at White Shaman. It's located in the far left-hand side of the mural. So when you go to the site, you'll know where to look. And emerging out of this crenellated arch is a small antlered anthropomorph. It's the one we discussed earlier with the black dots attached to its, with the red antler tines attached to its black dots. So now let's look at the patterns in ethnographic and ethnohistoric literature to see if we can't get some idea of what that represents, what that recurring motif is all about. So historical accounts and ethnographic observations of indigenous groups in Mesoamerica really provided us with a lot of useful information to start formulating hypotheses to explain these patterns, to understand what that crenellated arch and the hole in the arch and the anthropomorph passing through it. They help us to get these hypotheses formulated so that we can explain the patterns observed in the attribute data. Really, the two that I use the most are the Aztec and the Huichol, but also the Yaqui. And really, my experience has been that most of the Uto-Aztecan speaking people, whether they are Mesoamerica or the American Southwest, their myths are rich in information that are useful for looking at the rock art. When we did this, what we found was that the crenellated arch with the figure emerging out of it bears a really strong resemblance to the graphic and the architectural and the textual images of primordial mountains and cave birthplaces. According to myth, these are the locations where the sun was born and where the gods and the souls of the ancestors emerged from the underworld. This is an effigy of the Huichol sacred mountain. They call it Dawn Mountain. And they believe that the sun climbs these steps up out of the underworld and then comes out of a cave at the top. But it's a replica of a mountain. And of course, we're all familiar with things like the Pyramid of the Sun being a replica also of that same idea, that same concept. This is Chicomostac, the birthplace of the Chichimec. This concept of the universe consisting of various cosmic regions or levels is common in many cultures around the world, of course, certainly including Mesoamerica. For people that hold this view, the center or axis mundi is the point of intersection between these regions where communication with and travel between the realms is possible. Also prevalent in this is a belief that the earth is surrounded by a giant serpent. This is oftentimes perceived as the water that surrounds the earth and the earth in the middle. But regardless, passage through these different realms requires passing through the serpent. A sacred mountain in the east was believed to contain creator gods, ancestors, and the seeds of life, and all things emerged through a cave in the mountain which served as a portal between the different realms. And here's your serpent again, and we've got the deer coming out. I love these little critters all coming out. This is from the Florentine Codex. So journeying to the other world, these other world journeys that would be made by deities and by ancestors and by shamans and others, involves an emergence or descent into the underworld through a cave at a sacred mountain. This is Chikomostak again, and this is from the Codex Selden Roll. We've got the serpent's eyes and mouth and teeth, the serpent's body. Passage through or encounter with the serpent in the cave, which is what is going on here. Concepts of death and rebirth, these are all associated with these journeys into the other world. The serpent, this is one that many of you may be familiar with, and if you've gotten to see it yourself on the equinox, I'm seriously jealous. But this is El Castillo, the Temple of Kukulkan at Chichen Itza. And in this case, we have the serpent that runs down the mountain. This is, again, think of this as an architectural manifestation of the sacred mountain, and the serpent that runs down the mountain, and here's the head that's at the base. And on the equinox, it lights it up, and the snake literally goes down and descends the pyramid. Oh, I want to see it so bad. So an interesting thing about our motif, the one that we are hypothesizing represents this same concept of a sacred mountain or a primordial mountain, on the equinoxes in the Lower Pecos, this particular motif is illuminated at around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I think it's about 4 o'clock. I've got the timestamp on my images. But what you can actually watch is the sun climb up those solar steps out of the underworld. So it does something similar to what happens at Chichen. So why would snakes be equated with journeys between this and the other world? This is kind of the testing aspect. Why would we have snakes so many times associated with journeys between this and the other world, with caves, with death and rebirth? Most of you are probably answering this question before I pop up the answer, but all you have to do is to look at the environment. So it makes perfect sense that they would equate the serpent with a gateway between this world and the other world, and ideas of being swallowed and passed through the body of a serpent and death and rebirth. These are things that they witnessed in the natural environment. And that might also help us to understand why this idea of the serpent and the portal through the serpent is not just something associated with Mesoamerica or the American Southwest, or even North America for that matter, because guess what? You see this all over the world. But people throughout time all over the world would have seen those same behaviors in animals. So, given this, I believe that the crenellated arch is a graphic representation of a primordial mountain or cave birthplace. And according to myth, these are the locations where the sun was born and where the gods and the souls of the ancestors emerged from the underworld. And if this is the case, then the emergent figure may represent a deity or ancestor spirit. And indeed it does. I think we're probably okay on time, so if that's okay, if you all are up for it, I'll take you into a little bit about how we know who this particular figure is. I go into this at great depth in my most recent book. It was released November 2016, and there's no way I can cover it in the detail that I do in the book, so I encourage you to get a copy of it, and you can refer back to it if I lose you in the next few slides that are coming up. Okay, so our figure, this little antlered figure that we talked about earlier, is painted in red and black. It's portrayed with black eyes or a mask, as you see here. And upon its head are red antlers tipped with black dots. In its right hand is an atlatl loaded with a dart. In its left hand are some additional darts and a staff and power bundle. It has an upside down staff, which to me is just fascinating. We haven't yet figured out why it's upside down, but I think we'll be able to. It also has wrist and elbow adornments decorating each arm. And overlying the figure are two impaled centipede-like motifs that have been painted in yellow. So the attributes of this anthropomorph and that crenellated arch have corresponding analogs in both the Huichol and the Nahua myth and art. And based on these parallels, we've hypothesized that the antlered anthropomorph is a prototypical fire god. And for the Huichol and the Nahua, the fire god and his avatar, the morning star, gave rise to the birth of the sun and the beginning of time. This kind of gives you a sense of how we go about doing the analysis. We have our attributes, we have the ethnographic information, and then we start looking to see where the parallels are. The fire god dwells at the center of the cosmos, whether you're Huichol or you're Aztec or you're Maya. He is the axis mundi. He unites the world above with the world below. And according to the Huichol, that aspect of him which is above the ground is the sun of day, and that which is below the ground is the sun and the underworld at night. In the mural, the artists indicated this relationship by placing the figure at the center of the primordial mountain. And through the painting sequence, black first, followed by red, and then yellow, they literally wove him into the mountain. He is at the center of the cosmos. The antlered figure is painted, as I said, in red and black, and this attribute is analogous to the dualistic aspect of the Nahua fire god. The old fire god was the oldest of all the deities, and he is the god of duality, red and black, fire and water, father and mother, day and night. So although I'm saying he, by the way, he is both mother and father. He is both male and female, day and night. He is the union of all opposites. In the codices, he's often portrayed with a black stripe across his eyes. Our figure is uniquely portrayed with this black mask or goggle, like, either black eyes or a goggle-like mask. In his right hand, he wields an atlatl that's loaded with a dart. The Mesoamerican fire god and his avatar, the morning star, are also associated with spear throwers. In the creation stories, Morning Star rose from the underworld at dawn to slay the stars, and the sacrifice of the stars fueled the sunrise. Associated with the figure's left hand are two images resembling centipedes. In Mesoamerica, centipedes are associated with the underworld and the sun's resurrection from it. It's very important. According to the Huichol, these engraved images of centipedes that they have in their, they do petroglyphs of them, are directly linked with the primordial ancestors' emergence from the underworld and the birth of the sun and the coming of rain. But perhaps the strongest parallels between the antlered anthropomorph and the fire god are its red antlers. For both the Huichol and the Nahua, antlers or deer headdresses denote solar fire, both of which are equated with the color red. But what about these black dots? Well, the artists of the White Shaman, of this mural, as well as those others that I showed you earlier, not only painted the black first, in this case, he painted she painted specifically 9 black dots. In the Nawa calendar, the fire god Xuticutli and his avatar Quetzalcoatl, morning star, are patrons of the 9th day. The sign for the 9th day is water, and there are 9 levels of the underworld. And again, black is equated with water in the underworld. So perhaps this is a numerological indicator of who this particular character is as well. So here in the White Shaman mural, the divine essence of the fire, sun, and morning star are fused into the small antlered anthropomorph that's emerging from the primordial mountain. As the god of fire, he dwells at the center of the universe. His flames, which are graphically portrayed as the deer antlers, uphold the sky and fuel the birth of the sun. And that's it. Thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed this. And if you ever get the chance to visit the White Shaman site at night, this is the view you get to see. It's an absolutely stunning view. So I now open it up to anybody that might have some questions.
Are there any questions? We have all the microphones unmuted for Carolyn.
Hi, Carolyn. It's Carol Patterson.
Hi, Carol.
And of course, I'm very excited about your work and how much similarity I see up in the Ute and Paiute stuff up here.
Yes.
Connection, especially with the colors. But one attribute I would like to see, or I could provide for you, maybe in a study, is all the gestural attributes.
Oh, yes.
Because that's a category that has a lot of meaning as well, and I've been studying it for so long I could add a lot of information for you.
I would love that, because like I said earlier, everything carries meaning. Nothing is random and arbitrary. And gesture is hugely important with that.
Very good.
Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, Darwin has one.
Go ahead.
Carolyn, I wasn't real sure, after having read your book here, exactly what hip clusters mean. I wasn't real sure whether you were indicating those little lines around the skeletonized figures or just what that is. Could you kind of tell me?
Yes, hip clusters are an attribute that we find mostly at Seminole Canyon and Painted Canyon. It's very restricted geographically, and looks just exactly like what it sounds. There'll be almost like you'll see a belt way down low on the hip, down just above the legs. Then there'll be some protrusions that come off of it that look like feathers.
Okay. All right.
Where am I? I should see maybe.
Protrusions. All right. Now I know what I was looking at.
Right. And you'll see them a lot at Panther Cave, and Fate Bell has some at Fate Bell.
One other question, if you have the time there.
Sure.
I understand that peyote and Akura had a lot of, there were a lot of motifs that were done as a result or to symbolize those. And I didn't really hear you mention that.
Well, you're right. I talk about those a lot in my first book, and I do talk about the peyote. Well, I talk about both in my second book as well. But they're just limited in how much you can actually go.
Yeah.
What I was trying to really communicate tonight was that, first off, how you can go about getting into the deeper meaning. and then tying it back to myths that are still with us today that can inform these ancient paintings.
And I guess if no one else is jumping in, I have one other question with regard to the fossils that are in that area, in the limestone. Are we going to find a lot of that kind of thing too?
Oh yes, there are a lot. You'll see plenty.
Thank you, Carolyn. I got an awful lot out of your talk here, and really appreciate you kind of giving us an eye of what we're going to see. So
You're more than welcome.
Are there any other questions?
Yeah, this is, oh,
Go ahead.
This is Joe, and I'm referring back to the time, Carolyn, when you were talking about the crosses. That was during I believe during the late prehistoric and the late archaic. And I'm particularly interested in circles and crosses. And you made a statement near the end when you were talking about the crosses, is you said something how the cross was associated with, and I didn't get what that was.
The sun and Venus. And the sun and Venus.
And oh, thank you. And now that I'm on that, if I could ask you one more thing, I'd like to know how is this cross similar to circles? How is it universal? I mean, where does it come from? That sounds.
That's the $1 million question.
Okay, so it isn't as. I'm not so dumb that I don't know.
No, I mean, this is an old world. Prior to even the emergence of the Pecos River style rock art, you have the solar cross appearing in the old world. So, you know, it's a very widespread motif.
And mysterious one then. I mean, we don't really.
It relates back to the quadripartite universe and the directions, and you know, there's a lot there, but you know, I have not spent a lot of time studying this particular symbol. It's just one that I know is present at sites in the Lower Pecos, and that is also very prevalent down in Mesoamerica. And in Mesoamerica, it's totally widespread and associated with either the sun or Venus.
Thank you very much.
I see that Tish has a hand up. There's a little symbol by her name. Do you have a question? Tish?
Hi, can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, I'm from San Juan Basin. I haven't had the Lower Pecos talk before, and this is fascinating. I did have a question that came up. In the antlers where you were describing the flames,
Yes.
could they have been representing any kind of flames from a total eclipse?
That's a good question. I don't know. I know only that the fire god is identified as having antlers in Mesoamerica. And that's been attributed a lot back to deer antlers and when they're present, when they shed them, when they get, you know, the velvet, all of these types of things. But I've not heard any discussion of it associated with the eclipse. So that would be an interesting thing to explore.
Oh, thank you very much. You had a very, very interesting talk. Very well done. I appreciate knowing about it and the fact that CRAA has brought you into this.
Thank you so much.
This is Teresa, and I just want to thank you, Carolyn, because there are a few people who were participating with this webinar who are going to be on the trip next month, and this will be they'll give them some idea of what to look for in certain areas that you maybe not, other things will just jump out at them. They won't look at these really small details like the red monochrome, red linear.
Well, it's so true, and that's why I brought this in. It was risky because I know that there are many people that are not going on the tour, but for those that are, this going to give you a chance to really get in there and start looking closely. You'll know to go look for the red linear figures in these different locations. You'll look for specific motifs.
Right.
You know, it's really, really helpful, I think, to do that.
Now, Greg Williams is going to take us around the first 4 days.
Good.
And then Amanda is going to have a presentation at Shumla on Friday morning, and then the group is going into the upper Seminole Canyon area.
Well, you're going to be in good hands. She's dynamite.
I see that Diane has raised her hand.
Yes. I talked to Carolyn earlier today, and we have a business acquaintance, Mark W., and he's done some work down there, and he is talking to me about the layers of artwork that's on top of each other. Now, are those there for the time frame of ages back, or do you think some of them are like generations? The shamans would come out and tell the story, and then maybe sometime a couple of 100 years later, the story changes just a little bit, so they changed the pictograph and added features to it?
Actually, quite the contrary, Diane. What we're finding, like at the White Shaman site, when we were able to identify that they applied all of the black, followed by the red, the yellow, and the white, that may have been done in a week's time or 2 weeks' time. This is not something that would have been generated
added later. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Now, used for generation upon generation, but this might be the first time that things, you know, the White Shaman mural itself is the story about the birth of time and the creation of the sun. And this might be the first time that it's codified, you know, actually put down, taken out of an oral tradition and put onto a wall to kind of, I use the term concretize it, which then kind of fixes it in time. I don't know that for sure, but certainly it's the oldest one we're aware of at this time.
But you didn't find any evidence of later pictographs added on top of it, or there are others there, but not from the same story.
Right, right. Yeah, the White Shaman, there are a few images that I think were brought in and added over that are a different style, but the vast majority of the panel is one. And we're starting to do this microscopy at other sites, and we're finding similar kinds of things where you can start recognizing these as compositions, not a random collection of images, but serious compositions that are picture narratives that, you know, composed of a graphic vocabulary.
Definitely sounds really interesting. I'd love to try and make that trip this March.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, thank you. It's been very interesting. I've loved the show and telling me more about the artwork there. I've watched some of the stills on the internet and read a little bit about in your book, but you covered some pretty good questions there on, you know, like the black dots. Were they laid first, you know, and did they paint over them? And was that just a, you know, a coincidence that they were in the line of the art? Because they seem so random until they were pointed out. Like you said, there were 9 days and it had a meaning to it. So that's where they started.
Right.
Learned a lot.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
So are there any other questions or comments?
Great presentation, I thought.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Carolyn.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Yes,
thank
just
you.
outstanding.
I'm glad you all enjoyed it. I hope all of you will get a chance to go down and see this incredible resource. It's an exciting place to go and visit, and support Shumla, please. We're in the process of a 3-year project to document all known rock art sites in the Lower Pecos over a three-year period. That's over 350 sites. We're discovering new sites along the way and identifying new patterns. And like I say, you know, things are wide open, but we can't do it without financial support. So please contribute to Shumla to support this project.
That's a good question.
Right. Well, thank you very much.
And
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Will
I'm
do.
working here with Bob. This is Evelyn, and I just want to echo what Carolyn just said. Please support Shumla. It's incredible the work going on down there, and look at all that equipment. Look at all those people. It is, but it is rock art research at the absolute cutting edge. So I'm so glad she was able to do this tonight. Thank you, Carolyn.
Thank you, Evelyn.
Thank you. Good night.
Thanks.
Good
Thank
night.
you. Good night,
Thank you very
everyone.
much,
Good night.
Evelyn. And thank you very much, Carolyn. This was really great.
Thanks so much. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Hi.